All right, James, thanks for joining me today.
No, you're very welcome. It's brilliant to be here.
It's good to have you here. So I've done a little bit of research on you. So obviously you're the author of the number one best-selling book called Investable Entrepreneur, and you're a business advisor of the year, and you are the co-founder of Robot Mascot, which is a global award-winning investment readiness agency. And the last number that I was able to get was that you helped founders raise over 170 million pounds in funding, or was it dollars? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess we're going to talk a lot about fundraising and investing today, but we'll see where the conversation takes
Yeah,
us.
absolutely. It's actually 220 million now. So yeah,
There we go.
it's always going up, right? Always going up.
There we go. Nice. So obviously, I'd love to hear some stories and more about that. But maybe just to start, just for the context, I believe you've been doing this for a while now, right? This is like a decade or so. Can you just take us to the beginnings? How did Robot Mascot start?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so the business is coming up to about 10 years. So I'm not sure how long it's been as a limited company, but we've definitely been doing this for nearly 10 years now. So started life as two co-founders, two creatives. I was a designer, my business partner was a creative director. We created a brand agency. He created it. I joined him. I think he was about a year into sort of being a sole trader, trading as Robot Mascot. I joined him. Soon after that, we sort of officially launched as a limited company and started the business proper. And we started life as a brand agency. Really wanted to work with visionaries, like people that the pioneers, people doing something different, wanted to help them create their brand, do something exciting and different and innovative in the world. And as a result of that, we started talking to a lot of startups in the tech scene around London, and realized through those experiences and also some advice that some advisors of ours gave that also happened to be angel investors, that communicating to investors was a really big issue for founders. And we had a few clients that we'd built the brands for that then said, could you help us with your pitch deck? Could you design our pitch deck for us? And we're like, yeah, sure. Send over your business plan and your financials, and we'll sort of put something together. We'll write the content and put a pitch together. You know, how hard it can be? We've all seen Dragon's Den. It can't be too challenging. They would, start up ourselves. We just wanted the work, right? And so we sort of fumbled through the first few projects. And yeah, these advisors that were also angel investors said, these are great. Like, if every pitch sent my way looked and sounded and read like these, it would make our lives so much easier. I think you're onto something here. That you've got something. Might be worth exploring it, seeing if you can package it up as a service. And that's exactly what we did. We spent years of researching with both founders that have raised investment, investors, and everyone in that space to kind of find out what really makes investors tick. And we became an expert in the mind of investors, and we pivoted slowly the business from a brand communication agency to a specialist investor communication agency.
Mm-hmm.
And all we do now is create pitch decks to raise investment. And through the result of that, we've kind of expanded our services. So we realized that not everyone has a fully formed business plan, financial projection, so they needed help with those. So we then launched those services and started to sort of bundle up our offer to kind of take a founder all the way from sort of having nothing all the way through to having all of their pitch materials, their financials, their business plan already. And more recently, we've then launched the investor outreach piece, because it's all well and good having a great pitch, but if you can't speak to investors, it's kind of like having a website with no traffic. So yeah, over the years it's evolved and expanded, but yeah, that's the starting point.
Really interesting. So started really more on the branding and creative side, and then looks like it went, or it's still going more and more into a like business strategy and fundraising strategy and those kind of topics.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that's partly why the book was is so successful, is because I'm not an ex-VC telling founders how to pitch to VCs. I'm an entrepreneur myself who knew nothing about how to raise funding, figured it out for some clients, found out, researched it, understood the target market, who like we would with any brand project, which in this case was the investor. And it's like, how do we sell this thing to them, this product, which is shares? So we sell products. That's what me and my co-founder have spent our lives doing, in branding and advertising, selling products. We just treated shares as a product. and the angel
Hmm.
investor as the consumer. How
Mm,
do
yeah.
we best sell this to them? We need to get inside their head. We need to know what makes them tick, and we need to create language that makes them want to buy. So we just applied those same skill sets. So the book talks more about everything I learned trying to figure this out. So I'm talking in the language of of a founder to a founder, rather than talking as an investor to a founder. So I think it has a different tone and it has a different approach, and I think that resonates with a lot of entrepreneurs because it feels more real, more like
Hmm.
this is what it's really like, I think.
In the book, I think you talk about an investable entrepreneur, right? That's what it's all about. So what is an investable entrepreneur?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is the sort of term we've created to define kind of that ideal founder, the one that raises capital. So about 1% of founders raise capital successfully.
That's 1% out of those who try to raise, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it's about
Yeah.
1% ish success rate. It
Mm.
fluctuates, but generally sticks in and around 1%. So something special about that 1%, something's different about them. Something sets them apart, and we wanted to sort of distill what that was, and we sort of coined that character, the investable entrepreneur. You know, well, they're the 1%. That everyone else is an entrepreneur, they're the investable entrepreneur. And
Hmm.
if you want to raise investment, you need to be an investable entrepreneur. And what we realized that there's three key traits that were expressed by three we call critical fundraising assets. So the three traits are, first, that you're highly resourceful as an entrepreneur, and a highly resourceful entrepreneur can basically leverage resources beyond their current control. So this could be capital, but it could be talent, it could be partnerships, it could be advisors. You're able to bring all of these things around you, and you do that by being able to really clearly pitch your vision and get people to enroll in your vision. Because when you can get people excited by your vision, they'll invest in your business, but you'll also find top talent want to join your team. They'll do so at a lower than market rate salary in return for some equity. You'll be able to bring on board incredible advisors to support you. You can access game-changing partnerships to launch your business. So the first thing is to be a highly resourceful entrepreneur. The second thing was that they were very financially competent. They really understood the financial risks as well as the financial rewards. They knew how to reassure the investor enough in their financial capabilities that they were able to protect their wealth. You know, the investor is investing their own, certainly angels and high net worths, investing their own personal wealth into you and your vision. You could look at that as being their kid's inheritance, and they're entrusting that in you to deliver a return so that they can pass that on to the next generation. So you're asking a lot, not only to back
Hmm.
you and your vision out of everybody else who's pitching, but also for them to risk their own capital, their kids' inheritance on you and your vision and your idea. So you need to reassure them that you're financially competent, are going to be able to deliver those financial returns that they're looking for, that you have an eye on the prize, which is that eventual exit, and the type of that you're building the type of business that could deliver them the types of returns they're looking for. And then the final trait was that they were commercially competent. They understood how to create a commercially viable business. They didn't just have an idea, they knew how to commercialize it, they knew how to scale it up. They had a short and a long-term plan for developing this business, and they had a very clear roadmap, not just on product, but on sales and marketing and recruitment and all of
Hmm.
these things that are key components of the business. And they knew what they needed in the short term, but they also had an idea, and obviously none of this is exact, but an idea of where they were heading and what they needed in the future. So once you had those three elements, and you could convince an investor that you had those three traits, you became an investable entrepreneur. And the way we express that is through the business plan, the financial projections, and the pitch materials. The business plan shows that you're commercially credible, that you can
Hmm.
have an implementation strategy that's going to deliver success. The financials, of course, show that you're financially competent, and the pitch gets people excited by your vision. And if you can get those things done at a high level and really, really, really well, you become an investable entrepreneur. And I think very few founders understand the reasons why they're asked for a pitch, or why they're asked for a financial model, or why they might be asked to talk through their business case. Because for them, it's all about the product and the vision and the idea. And the forecasts just seem like random kind of numbers, finger in the air kind of numbers. Who knows what's happening in the next 6 months, let alone the next 5 years. But it's not about the actual numbers. It's about how you've built them and what they say about how you think strategically and how financially competent you are as a founder. It's more about that and understanding how you think than it is the actual result of the number in the cell in the spreadsheet, because everyone knows that whatever you put in year 5 for revenue is made up. Like, that's the one thing founders and investors can agree upon, is it's made up, but it's about how you make it up that's important. So having that context really helps founders realize why they're being asked for these things and why it's worth putting the effort into them, I think.
All right, before we continue, I want to take a second to talk about our sponsor. I've always been saying that one of the best ways to learn about business is by working closely with a smart and successful entrepreneur, and this might be your opportunity. Our sponsor is a company called Judge Me. Judge Me is a Shopify product review plugin, and they're the number one plugin on Shopify. They're literally, if you look at the Shopify App Store, they're in the first spot. They're bootstrapped, and they managed to outcompete other companies that raised hundreds of millions of dollars by just being smarter and building a better product. They were started by PJ, who was also a guest on the Founders Lounge, episode 54, so I recommend you to check it out. They recently moved their headquarters to London, and they're looking for smart people to join them. They're looking for product managers, engineers, and they're looking to fill other roles as well. So check out careers.judge.me and see if you find any role that you like and apply. So that's careers.judge.me. Now enjoy the rest of the episode. It's so funny. You just mentioned the numbers, and with my previous startup, we raised an investment round, right? We raised around $500,000 from mostly from angel investors. And yesterday, when I was preparing for this podcast, I actually looked at our pitch after years. So that was we raised 7 years ago or so. My first proper startup, very little experience. I worked at a startup school before, which was some kind of like an accelerator where we were also teaching founders how to pitch. So I knew a little bit about pitching and decks, and I knew about different formats. We used to follow like the Sequoia, I think it was Sequoia pitch deck, like the specific sequence of which slides to include and so on and so forth. Anyway, I was looking through our pitch deck yesterday, and I was looking at the financials, and I was just laughing. I was like, oh my God, these numbers, first of all, they were crazy. Second of all, some of them made zero sense. and it's so funny when you don't know what you're doing, and the numbers were, I mean, obviously made up. Any projection is made up, especially in a startup when you have zero data and zero kind of track record to to back those numbers up, right? But it does make a difference what those projections are based on. I felt like ours were just wild.
yeah well, there's a sort of an unwritten rule amongst most investors, to certainly angel investors, to kind of double the length of time and half the amount of revenue that a founder projects. And if that still looks like it's possible, then maybe there's something there. But it's a common thing. It's really difficult though to know, and it will vary investor to investor. There's no one right rule, and that's why it's less about the numbers and more about how you got to them. And you're always going to be criticized on those numbers. It's about how you respond to that criticism and say, look, I understand that that's a challenge, but it's a challenge we want to take on. It's, it's going to take a lot of hard work and possibly even a little bit of luck, but this is what we're going to do to get there. This is why we believe this to be possible. This is what stepping stones we're going to take to achieve this. So whether they're going to say they're too high or too low, they're never going to say they're right. You've just got to be able to respond as to why you believe in them and why you're working towards that goal and why you believe that can be possible, and have a credible backstory to it. And that's the secret, really. I've seen founders kind of go, right, I do want to be sort of show I'm sensible and perhaps more conservative, not like these other founders that put crazy numbers in. So I've gone for sort of 10 million revenue in 5 years. And I was like, I can guarantee they're going to think that's not high enough growth. To most investors say that's not enough growth to deliver a return. So sure enough, that's exactly what happened. You're growing too slowly. I don't think there's enough of an opportunity here. So they wax it up to 20 million. Next conversation, this is too high. Like, how on earth do you think you're going to do 20 million in 5 years from a standing start? And they're like, well, but the last investors said that 10 was too low. So I thought I'd change it to 20. It's like, that's a really crap reason for changing your forecast, right? But if in both cases, they'd have had a proper response as to, well, 10 million is achievable based on X, Y, and Z. Now, if we were to launch into vertical A, B, and C, that would expand our market share to Y. And if we're able to do that quick enough, then absolutely we could start hitting volume revenues of 20, 30 maybe even 50 million. It might take 8 years instead of 5 to get there, but that's possible because there are these other opportunities, but we've not really explored those markets enough yet. So we're basing this on the markets we have explored and where we have delivered product market fit. Suddenly, that's a completely different conversation, isn't it?
Of course, yeah.
So it's about being able to have that narrative, being that investable entrepreneur, having that strategy that backs up the numbers, and both of those things backing up the pitch, and being able to hold yourself in those conversations and in those moments, I think.
You mentioned before, so I want to come back to pitching and pitch decks later, but one thing you mentioned before, so there are three things about the investable entrepreneur, right? There's commercial competence, financial competence, and resourcefulness. So for financial competence and commercial competence, it's a skill that we know can be learned, right? It's something you can, I don't know, you can get mentors, you can read books, you can learn through doing, whatever it is. What about resourcefulness? Is that something that can be learned, or what do you think about it?
I think it can be. For some founders, it's more natural than others. This is the showmanship bit, really, isn't it? It's the being comfortable standing up and presenting your vision and kind of rallying people around you. The Richard Branson, Elon Musk role, less Jeff Bezos. He's very commercially competent, financially competent, but you wouldn't put him as a great visionary in terms of his or his ability to kind of pitch to people and get them really excited. But Steve Jobs was absolutely great at it. But you probably don't think of him as being particularly financially competent. He had people around him who could do that. So different founders have different natural homes across those three areas. And it's about trying to recognize where you're really good and where you need to level yourself up in those areas to at least be able to hold your own. So having practicing as much as you can. The story I often use is Martin Luther King, the classic, I have a dream speech. We all know the rehearsed version that was on TV, right? But he did that speech 1,000 times up and down the States in different church groups for about 3 years before he got that TV address. Once he got that TV address, he thought, well, this is nationally broadcast and I've already done this speech 3,000 times across, over the last 3 years across the country. Everyone who's going to watch this will have heard it already, or a lot of people will. So I'm going to change the speech. I'm going to do a different talk. And I'm going to talk about how America's given ethnic minorities a blank check. And it was a blank check speech. And that was what was sent to the broadcasters. And they had the script there ready to commentate on it. And halfway through the talk, he saw people were leaving, people were getting restless. And there was this lady who was a soul singer who used to accompany him on these talks and do kind of a bit of a warm-up act and get people kind of in a good mood. And she shouted, "Tell them about the dream, Martin. Tell them about the dream." And he switched into his tried and tested and rehearsed I have a dream speech that he could deliver with confidence and power. And he'd said those words thousands and thousands of times. And the rest is history. It's the most iconic speech of all time. So the moral of that story really is when you're happy with your pitch, when you're happy that it delivers the sorts of information you want to get across, but your passion and your vision and your story in a way that you want to tell it, stick and don't twist. Just keep pitching the same pitch again and again and again. If investors are asking you questions about things, don't go away thinking, crap, I should have added another slide to the pitch to address that so I don't get asked that again. The fact that they're asking you questions means you've engaged them, you've sold them in on the vision, and they want to find out more. If you don't get any questions, it means you've bored them to tears and they can't get you out of the room quick enough. So you want questions, but it doesn't mean you're missing content in your pitch. Your pitch is there to get them to invest their time, not get them to invest their money. The pitch is there for them to say, I want to lean in. I want to spend another 15 minutes with you asking questions and having a conversation. And I want to book another meeting with you to go through the detail. So you want them to invest their time and you want them to be engaged. So just practice the same pitch again and again and again. Every opportunity you can, go to pitch events. Maybe if you're in an accelerator program, bring a cohort together and practice your pitch on each other. Just get really, really good at it. I wrote my book nearly 4 years ago, 3 years ago now, 4 years ago. And since before I wrote that book, actually, a lot of the core content in that book was part of a weekly presentation I give to founders as part of our marketing at Robot Mascot. I do a weekly fundraising strategy session. I've been doing more or less the same strategy session and talking about the same ideas in this book now for 4 or 5 years, same methodology. And it means I can just present it at any given opportunity with confidence and clarity. I don't change it too much. I get bored of it the same way that, Chris Martin of Coldplay probably is bored of singing Yellow.
Hmm.
Right? Probably the last thing he wants to do is go up and stand on stage and sing Yellow, because he's just done it millions of times. But it's what paid the bills. It's what everyone is there to see. So you kind of just need to get into that rhythm and get into that groove and build that confidence. Because I used to hate public speaking, hated it. And now I'm doing weekly presentations in front of hundreds of people, speaking on podcasts. And a few years ago, the idea of getting up in front of a crowd of people or even in one-on-one and delivering something, a presentation, would have terrified me. But you get better at it as time goes on if you stick with it.
You do, yeah. I talk about that sometimes also here, just about the podcast, right? For me, publishing the first few episodes of the podcast was terrifying. It was like weird. I was strange on the podcast, on the camera. I didn't know what to talk about. And then eventually, so we've done, I think, 75 or so episodes now. And eventually it just becomes natural, right? It becomes normal. And then you appreciate it so much. And for me, it was the same. I think very awkward and very not comfortable on camera. And then, yeah, those are the things that in the end you appreciate the most, when you actually overcome those challenges, right?
Yeah, I found some of the first videos I recorded for like on YouTube the other day, around what we do, and I was just like, oh my God, it's like I kind of want to take them down, but I probably shouldn't. But I was so awkward and so nervous. Like, you could see how nervous I was, and how awkward I felt. Yeah, it's crazy how quickly it becomes normal once you start doing it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. And I would say, I was thinking in the background about resourcefulness in general. I 100% learned how to be resourceful. I think when I was younger, I don't think I was naturally a resourceful person. I think I don't know, I didn't have to be, or I didn't learn how to be. And I learned by being around resourceful people. That was the number one thing. Just because, I don't know, it's a weird thing. It's not something you learn from books. It's really not. It's not something theoretical. And I don't think there are very good books about that. Probably depends also what exactly you want to be resourceful at, but just in the context of business, I've learned by being around other people who are good at that and seeing how they solve problems and seeing how they, think on the spot, and how when there's no solution, how they figure out a solution. I'm like, okay, interesting. And now, and then eventually, when I was in a difficult situation, or I had to solve a problem, I was like, how would that person think about this? And then that's how I got to the solution. I would like to think I'm much more resourceful now than I was.
Yeah,
back
that
in the
reminds
days.
me of a story. Like when we first started out, we were probably about 3-4 years old at this point, and we had identified someone called Daniel Priestley, who's written three
I
or
know
four
who it is,
business books, and the way he works really resonated with us. The sorts of things he said, and we'd never met him. We'd been a couple of his events, read all his books. And we had one of our first ever marketing plans. We had kind of marketing as the way I studied marketing. So we had the marketing plan, the way you're taught to do it in school type thing, and on marketing courses. And then under each section, we had a heading, what would Daniel do? And we started to think about how, based on everything we've learned through Daniel Priestley's books, how would Daniel do it? And those strategies were the ones that we still use today, and we still employ. Now, the funny thing, that what that led to was a client of ours, or a partner of ours, bringing us up in conversation to Daniel Priestley, this pitch agency. And he then checked us out, and he was blown away by what we were doing. And we met him, and then he became a shareholder in Robot Mascot. So we've got this plan from 3 years earlier going, what would Daniel do? And 3 years later, we're in a room with him, and he wants to be part of the business, because he could look at our website and go, with a little bit of my help, they could really just transform what they're doing. And he saw that because we were doing what he says he should do, just not as good as perhaps we could do if we had his one-to-one advice. But he saw something in us because we were reflecting the way. Anyway, we've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but it's just that idea of thinking about how would someone else do it really helps you unblock the next step of the journey, or the thing that you're struggling with. It's a great way to just think outside the box a little bit and just get outside of your own mind.
Love it. I think that's such a good trick that anyone should use, and just try to apply it, and then try to solve problems like that. So when it comes to fundraising, and when it comes to your clients, how, so I'm trying to understand, somebody comes to you, so let's say it's a founder or it's a startup team, and what's usually there? So do they come with a pitch, or they've got nothing, or how do they just know that they want to raise funding but they have no idea how to approach it? What's usually the kind of process that you take them through, and maybe what are the most common things that you need to teach them, or mistakes that they make?
Yeah, so the majority of our clients are coming to us have somewhere along that early stage journey, somewhere between concept and product market fit, and they need to raise funding for the next phase. So it could be very early pre-seed funding to get a proof of concept built, or it could be we've got an MVP in the market and we've got some beta users and we now need to raise some C capital to scale. Anything along that journey, really, from concept to product market fit. But they've never raised funding before, or the majority have never raised funding before. They're bootstrapped to this point. So they tend to be either actively in the business full time and they've bootstrapped it to this point, or this is still a side hustle and they've done pretty well and it's been funded so far as a kind of side hustle that doesn't have to pay their way, but they need to start focusing on it full time to scale up. And to do that, they need the funding required to make that shift from side hustle to full time on this project. So it's usually sort of those sorts of categories, but generally speaking, never raised funding before, don't really know what to say, how to say it, what they need in place. So then we extract from them for a strategic planning tool we've created their business case, kind of how they plan on growing the business, what their intentions are for the business in the short and the long term. And then we use that to produce business plans, financial models, pitch materials on their behalf, but kind of always with them, not for them, but with them, I suppose, and kind of reflect back and go, this is a potential gap, weakness. Here's some strengths we can leverage, but here's some areas we should focus on in terms of leveling up your business case or improving your expectations. Your growth ambition is too high or too low, or your valuation expectations too high or too low, or whatever it is. Give them the advice and the guidance they need to put together a credible business case, a credible set of financial projections, a captivating pitch deck to start engaging with investors. So yeah, that tends to be the scenario.
All right. How many investors does a founder usually need to talk to before they raise a round? So there's a little bit of a story behind this, because I think it was last week when I was talking to a first time founder who was working on an AI startup, which it's actually, I think it's a good idea. There's something in language learning, and they have an MVP, and they said they tried to raise funding and they didn't succeed. And I was like, okay, how many people did you pitch to? And I think he said 7 or maybe 5. And again, yesterday I went and I looked at how many investors we pitched to when we were raising back 6 years ago, and I think it was 55. And then in the end, it was maybe 15 of them or so who invested. And I actually thought that was a pretty good ratio. I'm curious, what's your experience? Because I from everything I hear and I see, 7 investors is virtually nothing, because
No,
you get a
yeah,
lot of no's in that.
yeah, and I think this is something I talk about a lot, and I'm thinking about. This is like a marketing funnel. So going back to our core principles, we started life in marketing and branding, and how do we apply those same strategies to selling shares in your company? If you think about let's say you were selling £100,000 annual subscription for a piece of technology, would you expect 7 prospecting meetings to turn into a sale?
Probably
Probably
not.
not. Probably not, depending on the sector and the product, but probably not. The ratio is probably nearer 50 prospecting meetings to one £100,000 sale. Now this is 100, 200, 300, 500,000 pound sale. Maybe people are putting in a check size of anything from 50 to 150k. So that you need to kind of think about this like any other marketing, sales and marketing process, and think about the marketing funnel. I need to load prospective investors, angels, high net worth individuals, VCs into the top of my funnel, and I should expect some of those to want me to pitch to them, and then once I pitch it to them, I need to expect a number of those to drop out, and they'll drop out every phase of the funnel. So the initial pitch, the second and third meetings, the due diligence, the legals, the depositing the cash. All of these steps, there's opportunities for investors to drop out of that funnel. So generally speaking, it's a 50 10 2 1 rule we use. So for every 50 pitches, 50 conversations, you'll end up with 10 pitches, 2 expressions of interest, and 1 investor. So you got 50 pitches. I don't know how many outreaches you had to do to get those 50 pitches, but it was probably 5 times that, maybe 200 emails, 300 emails, and you got 50 pitches, and then you got ultimately 15 investors at the end. So that matches that sort of 50-10-2-1 rule of 50 pitches down to, in fact, you did 50 pitches to 15, which is incredible, but it's a slightly different scenario. I tend to find that's quite a large number, isn't it? So it's probably a larger number on a smaller check size, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but yeah, it tends to be around 5 or so investors on average per round. I tend to see, but yeah, and we've had, but equally, we've had founders do it in 1 week with 1 pitch because they just happen to know the right person. But if you don't know the right people, if you don't already have them lined up, if you haven't already been nurturing them and letting them know that something's coming for the last 12 months, and every time you meet them, giving them an update on your progress, people read those stories. Oh, I did my pitch deck and I closed my round in a week with 1 investor. It's like, yeah, but you've been nurturing them for the last 12 months.
Yeah.
You've been telling them about your progress and your traction and your validation. They've been on that journey with you, and now you've opened your round and they were ready to invest 6 months ago. You just weren't ready for them. So if you're from a standing start, you need to start building those. There is no reason for founders who are thinking of raising investment in 6 months' time to not start reaching out to investors and high net worth now to say something's coming. Here's the vision. Here's a handful of slides just explaining the vision and the value proposition. We're currently working on this. Once we hit this milestone, we'll be opening our funding round. We think that's going to be in 6 to 8 months' time. We'd love to stay on your radar if you think this aligns with the type of investment you'd be interested in exploring further. And then they're like, yeah, this sounds good. Keep me posted. Every 2, 3, 4 weeks, send an update email. Here's all the progress we've made to date. Here's the opportunities that have appeared to us. Here's some sort of noteworthy news. Like we've got this individual who's very, very well respected on there, in the industry as an advisor, or, you could just start dropping little nuggets of, so over that time between now and 6 months' time, by the time you're pitched, they're going, look, I was ready 2 months ago. You've been making such incredible progress. I've been waiting for this. I've been, knocking at the door. And we've seen founders who do that. We've seen some do it accidentally. They don't realize that they're being that clever about it, but they are, and then they close their round really quickly. And others deliberately go down that route. But it's part of that resourcefulness, right? Some of them are naturally resourceful and they don't realize that they're building an audience of potential investors just through how they naturally operate. But yeah, if you can do something like that, you make your life so much easier. So it's about showing yourself as a leader in your space, and not being afraid to start pitching early. You don't have to wait until everything's in place if you approach it in the right way.
Audience building is an interesting topic, which I also want to talk about a little bit later. But before that, are there any other crazy or very interesting stories that you can talk about? So, for example, you mentioned you had a founder who just went and pitched to 1 person and raised in 1 week. So that's kind of crazy. But maybe there are any other stories that are, I don't know, maybe fundraising stories that really stuck in your mind for whatever reason. If there are any funny, interesting stories that you can talk about, because it's usually, fundraising is usually something that happens behind closed doors, and a lot of people don't really know much about it, right? It doesn't happen very publicly. But maybe there's something. This is the founder lounge, so it all stays behind closed doors anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, I won't mention names or anything like that, but there's probably a couple. So I'll start that are useful. So there's the one that did 1 pitch in 1 week and raised the capital because they'd been nurturing this individual for years. We talked about that. There's another founder who managed to raise in a week, and they did that by having a bold plan of, rather than 1-to-1 pitching, I'm going to do 1-to-many pitching. And I'm going to do 1-to-many pitching because they will physically be able to see the amount of interest there is in this business. And if they physically see the amount of interest, that's going to give them social proof and reassurance that this is an exciting opportunity. So it's kind of playing with investors at their own game. They're always saying, come back when you've got more traction. Well, you're showing them the traction you have in your round.
Sorry for interrupting. I just heard this phrase the other day. Nothing attracts a crowd like a crowd.
Exactly, right. You see a shop launch and there's a queue outside the door and you can't help but join the queue to see what all the fuss is about. It's exactly that idea. So you haven't got a physical store with a queue outside, but what you could do is arrange a pitch event, or in this founder's case, they booked out a meeting room, a 10 person boardroom, morning and afternoon for 5 days. Now, they spent about a month before that week doing that kind of warming up investors I talked about. We've got a pitch coming. We're starting to get ready for investment. When we hit these milestones, it'll be ready. They did all of that while they were building their business, getting their traction, putting their business plan and their financials and everything together. Then when they were ready, they started contacting all those individuals back saying, look, we're ready to open a round. We're doing a week of pitch events. We've got morning and afternoon sessions. This was pre-COVID, so it wasn't Zoom. It was in person. People actually traveled to meetings back in those days. But they all turned up, and they had sort of 8 to 10 people in a room, and they had an expression of interest form on every desk, which was basically your name, how much you might be willing to commit to this round. Are you looking for SCIS, EIS shares? Can you bring anything else to the table other than money? And then anything else you want to mention on this form. And he did the pitch, and he knew he was pitching to high net worth individuals and not necessarily seasoned investors. Not all of them understood SCIS and EIS. So half of his pitch was spent explaining this incredible tax scheme as if it's, only a small, it's a new thing that very few people can get. So made it sound quite exclusive. They got this exclusive arrangement with the UK government, sort of gave it this sort of big up because not half of the room had never heard of it. And suddenly they were like, so I can put 50K into you, get 25K back against my tax bill and get loss relief. So I've only really got this at risk. And he's like, yeah, it's cool, isn't it? And he used all the levers available to him, had all of these sort of 8 to 10 investors in a room morning and afternoon. Someone sitting there kind of on the fence, but maybe not a seasoned investor, so unsure whether or not what they should ask, but they see someone else asking a question, and then this founder responding very, very well to those questions. So that gives them the confidence that perhaps this is as good as it seems, because they might have otherwise been a bit too like, oh, I don't know, I've never done this before. And he ended up closing his round in that week. He got enough in expressions of interest to more than close his round. And then he rang them all back in order of preference based on what they'd put on these expression of interest forms. That I've got some good news and bad news. The good news is I've got enough to close my round. The bad news is that I've got more than I need, and I'm not planning on overfunding. So some investors are going to have to miss out. You're one of my top pick investors. I'd love to have you part of this journey. I think, the fact you can bring X, Y, and Z to the table is absolutely aligned, so valuable to us. Or I love the way you are aligned to our vision, whatever it is. Can you let me know whether can you let me know on this call or by the end of the week via email whether or not you're in? Because I need you to add you to our heads of terms. I need to get the lawyers involved to get the process moving. You're now in a situation where if I don't say yes, I'm going to miss out, because you're saying that was the other thing. Oh, by the way, if you've changed your mind, if you've decided you don't want to move forward, it's absolutely fine. As I said, I've got more investors than I need, so I'll just go to the next person on the list. Like I say, you're one of my top picks. I'd love to have you on board. So there's suddenly this time bound kind of, if I'm in, I'm in. If not, I'm going to miss out on this incredible opportunity. So that absolutely brilliant strategy. Very few people are capable of pulling something like that off, I have to say. But maybe if you just take a little something away from it. And if we've got time, there is one other story that I always like to share. And this is the complete 100%. Opposite.
I was just going to comment on this one. That's a person who you can tell that they're just like either born salesman or showman, or put a lot of thought and preparation into this, and that alone is a very strong indicator that they're probably a good investment, because it's like a person who can pull that off. It's that proof of this grit and creativity and getting stuff done in a different way, and that's already part of being an investable entrepreneur in my opinion.
I mean, it wasn't their first rodeo. You could probably gather that it wasn't their first time doing it, but there's a lot to learn from people like that. And they absolutely nailed it. And it was an incredible thing to witness. So that they called it that kind of showmanship you said about, they refer to it as with or without you energy. They kind of just go, this is happening with or without you. And they live their life by this idea of, this is going to happen with or without you. I'm going to make it happen. I'm confident in myself. I back my team. You can either be on board or not. And because that means that they're not nervous when they go in. It's not like, I really need your money. Please, please, please invest. The table's completely turned because they've got with or without you energy. which I think is just
Amazing. Yeah.
insightful. Yeah, incredible. So there's another story I like to share, which is like the opposite in a way, and this story I think really highlights to a founder the risks that investors are taking, and maybe helps them understand why they get put under so much scrutiny before an investment's made. Because there was another founder, quite a young chap. He was just sort of still at university, and we were working with him. It was one of the first deals I was ever involved with when we very first started pivoting into this space as an agency. And they had created a really incredible piece of technology at a hackathon at their university, and they got enough traction, and they built this product that was working, and they were getting so much kind of traction and interest for this that they quit university to pursue it full time. So they were seen to be an incredible founder that with like, a real talent. And this founder they were raising, I think, 300K, and they actually managed to raise 900K, or they got 900K in commitments. And they decided, unlike story one, where it was, I'm not overfunding, you're going to miss out. They decided, we'll take all the money. They're 18. They've just had nearly £1 million offered to them. I'm going to take all the money. So they took all the money. They sold probably a bit too much equity, but they'd live and learn. But it meant they could get so much more done. And what happened is they went AWOL. They disappeared. They decided they'd made it. They had £1 million in the bank. So they moved to London, had really expensive flats in a really nice part of town. They had a lovely swanky office for the handful of team members. And they didn't really build any product. They were flying off to the States for business meetings. Don't know what these business meetings were, but they were flying to the States. They were using they had sort of an Amex card, and were using that to get into the sort of the fancy lounges. And there was all these pictures on social media of them sort of living the high life as if they'd made it as an entrepreneur. And I started getting contacted by a couple of their investors, because they kind of knew that we'd worked with them, going, have you heard from this founder? Like, they've gone AWOL. We haven't heard anything from them. We don't know what's happening. Well, I'd seen these photos on social media because we happened to be connected. And I was like, God, don't know what to say. Like, he's just having a bit of fun with your business trips with his girlfriend to the States, and I'm guessing that's your money that's being spent on that. And it was just a complete shambles, and investors had lost complete control of this young founder who they'd given this cash to, and they had very little they could do about it, very little to prove that any of this was really, it was just a really weird situation. I never know quite how it got resolved and if it got resolved, but it was just this horrible situation of the investors just going, what on earth has happened to our cash? The founder's gone AWOL, no product's been built, he's burning through cash at a rate of knots, completely kind of just changed overnight once he had that cash in the bank. So that's the fear for a lot of these investors is could you be one of those horror stories? And that's why you've got to go above and beyond to make sure you've really got everything. Because if they're a minority shareholder, they've got very little in the way of power or decision making. You can pretty much do what you want. And even if it does say in your shareholders agreement, any purchases over X need to be approved by all shareholders, it doesn't stop you doing it. It's just really, it's really tough. So yeah, it's the complete opposite of a story, but I think it really showcases the potential fear, or the big fear, not potential fear, the big fear of a potential outcome that could happen when an investor invests in you. And that's what they've all heard these horror stories, and they're worried that you might be too good to be true, which is why having the business plan, the forecast, having really kind of put the effort into raising the funds it really goes to show that you're not going to be that.
That's interesting. I can imagine someone being just extremely, probably very charismatic. That's how I would imagine this kind of person. And just being very convincing, even though they don't necessarily know what they're talking about or what they're doing, right?
If they weren't a student at university, it would make a script for one of those kind of hustler TV shows, where like a scam artist TV show, wouldn't it?
The Fire Festival came to mind while we were talking.
There you go. Yeah, that's it. And I honestly think it wasn't that there wasn't any deliberate scam at play. They were genuine, but they just got carried away at 18, getting given almost £1 million just and burnt through it much quickly than they thought, having probably a little bit too much fun and not enough time focusing on the product. And I think it was a lesson for a lot of the angel investors in terms of managing younger founders who perhaps could get carried away. But yeah, it's a interesting experience for sure.
Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting one as well. Mm, so you mentioned building an audience before, and it sounds like this young gentleman managed to build his audience as well in a different way by spending his investors' money, probably living like a wealthy, successful businessman, and he's 18, 19 years old. But obviously there's a positive side to building an audience as well, right? Or the obviously the right way to do it. You mentioned it before that can be a very good way to also start building credibility and start building relationships with potential investors. It's a topic that also comes up very often recently when I talk to founders. It seems like a lot of them, or a lot of us, are considering that or doing that to some extent, right? Because it's also just helps you build your network and it brings opportunities your way sometimes, right? When you share
Mm,
what you're doing. So it sounds like that's something that you're also an advocate for and that you also recommend to your founders. I'm just wondering, yeah, what's your view on that, and what specifically do you recommend to founders? Because it is also always difficult, often feels like a bit of a trade-off, right? It's like, am I going to build my brand, or am I going to build the business, or is that the same thing?
mm.
It kind of is the same thing, but it feels also disconnected. So
Yeah.
what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so you could probably split this into building an audience and building a network. And one
Hmm.
is building a brand, a business brand, and one is building a personal brand. And if you can do both of those things, I think you're going to be much more successful. So if you build a brand that people can engage with, that they get excited by the vision, they align to the vision, they want it to succeed, you can build an audience around it. So a good example of that would be a client of ours called Frollo, which is a single parent community. Worked with them sort of 3-4 years ago. Wanted to create an app to support single parents and co-parenting situations. And they built a community of individuals around that topic, around that theme, around those challenges on Facebook and on Instagram, to the point where it was so engaged they were having physical meetups and putting on their own events and having their own kind of section at some festivals so that everyone could look after each other's kids, and then they could go off to the festival, and they kind of made it like the Frollo camp, and they had all of this stuff happening as almost like a club more than anything. And then because they had that audience, they could then go to investors and say,
Hmm.
we've got thousands of people engaged in this. We want to create an app community for them. And they went and got 500k investment, I think, off the back of a Facebook group, essentially. They built an audience first. If you've got an audience, you can sell a product to them. If you build a product but don't have an audience, you're stuck.
Yeah.
So I would always think about building an audience first, or certainly in parallel with the product, because the audience will, one, tell you what they want that product to be, and two, once you've got them engaged in the vision and the brand, they'll buy whatever you put in front of them. So one is building the audience, and then the other is building a network, and that's where the personal brand comes in. So certainly when you're thinking about how do you strategically move the business forward, how do you become highly resourceful, how do you leverage resource, that's much more about the personal brand. Do you as an individual look credible, someone who can make things happen, someone insightful? Do you look like a leader in your space? So can you take some of that information that's fed into that business around the problem you're solving and the market research you've done as part of your business plan, and turn that into articles and social posts and videos? And could you do weekly updates on your progress as you develop this business, and just make yourself this kind of leader, this inspirational person in your industry that's solving a meaningful problem? You're shining the spotlight on this problem you're trying to solve. It's not buy my product, buy my product, buy my product. It's here's a
Mm.
meaningful problem. Here's the data behind it. Here's why this needs to be solved. Oh, and by the way, we happen to be solving it like this. But it's here's a problem. We need to change the way we do things. Here's how we're going to solve it. And share those insights and those stats to make yourself appear to be an industry leader, someone who really has insights that can turn into business success. And then you can leverage that to create connections with the right people. You can go networking, you can talk to other business associates, you can bring in advisors, and they're much more likely to give you the time because they check your LinkedIn profile out and they can see all these articles and these thoughtful insights, and you're a thought leader, and you're going to be someone who is going to be worth having a chat with. You can then leverage that further to get meetings with people by saying, I'm writing a white paper on this subject. Could I interview you for that? Now,
Hmm.
these are a target investor or a target advisor. They agree to the interview because it makes them feel good. You get to know them through that interview, and then the relationship builds from there, and then they become one of your first investors or your first advisors. You could also think, well, now I've got this profile, let me start to leverage this in other ways by going, well, here's some target investors that I think would be perfect for this business, but I've got no way into them. I could do a cold outreach, but it'd be better to get a warm introduction. So let me look at their portfolio of companies. Let me find out who the founders are of those companies and start contacting them and saying, hey, look, I'm about 12, 18 months behind you. We're in a similar space, similar technology, but we're non-competing. I'd absolutely love to take you for lunch and just pick your brains on what it was like raising your first round of investment, because we're about to embark on that journey, and I'd really value just any input or advice you can give me. The fact you've offered them lunch makes it feel like you really value their time. They're also probably a founder in a position where they've never really seen themselves as someone with experience to share. They're still figuring things out for themselves, but they suddenly dawned on them that there's people kind of 12, 18 months behind them who could really benefit from their wisdom, and that makes them feel really warm inside. So they're bound to say yes, almost certainly in most cases. And they might say, I can't do lunch, but maybe happy to jump on a quick Zoom call, just take it, whatever. The offering of lunch is more just to say, I value your time and I'm not a waster, not a time waster. They're going to check out your LinkedIn profile, see all of this insights and go, actually, they look like they're really going to make something of themselves. It's worth a bit of my time. And then you can build the relationship up with them, and hey presto, you've got yourself a network of people who can introduce you to your ideal investors when the time is right. So you can do this is how to be highly resourceful, going back to the start. But this is like building audiences, networks, relationships, but also kind of almost playing chess in a way of how do I get to that one connection removed from my ideal target, and then how do I move the chess piece right towards where I need it to go. But I've seen founders do all of these sorts of things and do them all really well. And if you can build both that personal brand and that business brand, people buy from people ultimately. And you look at Apple and, Tim Cook, Steve Jobs, when, at the time had a much bigger personal following than the brand Apple. Look at Virgin, Richard Branson, a much bigger personal following than Virgin, SpaceX, Amazon, the leader, the personality, the CEO, the founder is the one that has all the following, because people buy from people want to work with people, not faceless brands. So if you can build both, I think you're going to have much more success than just building one or the other.
And I feel like it's going even more and more in that direction of people trusting people more than brands. I'm not sure if that's, you say, the internet and social media brought that, just because you can follow people more, you can see what they're doing. It's easier to connect effectively with people, right? Even though it's just by following them, their page on social media or whatever. But I think for some reason, and that's why the whole rise of influencers, right? That's why influencers and content creators are such a big thing, because we just trust them.
If you've got an audience, I mean, Prime, the drink Prime's a prime example.
Yes,
it's a really terrible fizzy drink, quite honestly.
And I've heard that it existed already for years and years before.
I hadn't heard it. Probably. But you stick it in. You team together two influencers with a following of a particular demographic, and suddenly it becomes the most sought after product of the year. And it's just a really crap version of Lucozade. It's like it's bizarre, but they have an audience, and once you've got an audience, you can sell them anything. That's what that's what we said earlier. That's what Frollo did. They built an audience of single parents, and they sold them a single parent community. People signed up because they liked the brand. They engaged with the audience was there. They engaged with the vision, and then whatever product you offered them, she could have offered them an app, or she could have offered them a weekend retreat. It wouldn't have mattered what she offered them. They'd have bought it because they were aligned with the Frollo vision, with the support and the guidance of solving their problems when it comes to being a single parent. She had the audience. She could sell anything to them at that point. It's super powerful.
On a slightly different topic. So you've been a mentor, and you're doing a lot of, as you mentioned before, presentations on fundraising and those kind of topics. I know you've been a mentor at Google Campus and the Founders Institute and a bunch of other organizations. So I think you're quite familiar with the startup ecosystem in London in general. So I have a friend who's coming to London for 3 months. He's not from the UK. He has an e-commerce store, not a very big one, but that's his full-time thing. He's coming to London for 3 months. He wants to make the most out of his time here. He wants to meet some people. He wants to get inspired. He wants to learn some new things. What would you recommend to him?
Oh wow! I'll be honest. I'm a bit out of the loop these days on those sorts of things. But what is it? Runway East. Does that still exist? I think a lot of these places have probably shut down. Oh, it's a good question. There's the London startup scene. That's where we'll start. So yeah, the London startup scene is probably most exciting thing I'm seeing at the moment. So this is a client of mine that, funny, I was mentoring them about a completely different business that they were raising funding for. And we were talking about some of the stories we talked about today and creating events to get people along
Hmm.
to like launch the fundraising campaign and make a big splash and create a bit of a buzz. So he was like, well, what's a great way of getting something that will help me pitch my business? I'll put on a pitch event for founders to pitch to investors, and I'll be one of the people who pitches. So he did exactly that, ended up with hundreds of founders turning up because this was about a year ago, post-COVID, all the events had died down. So hit the timing perfect. Everyone was crying out for some physical event to go to, and investors were turning up as well. About 20% of attendees were investors based on what they'd filled in on the form to attend. And now that's blown up. He's done multiple events, great venues. He's now ditched the original business idea and is now pursuing that as a business and getting funding for that.
Nice.
And it all came off of the back of those stories we talked about earlier. But that seems to me to be the one place that's buzzing at the moment and got real momentum behind it. So yeah, if you were to do one thing, that would be the London startup scene would be the one I'd look at.
Nice. Okay, I will check that out. It's funny because I struggled with the answer as well. That's why I asked you, because I was thinking, I was like, I want to give him the best advice, but I think once you're doing this for a while, you're not looking for those kind of events. In fact, I usually don't like to go to networking events because it's not, I don't know, it's typically somebody who's maybe just at the beginning of their career, or you don't usually find the kind of people that you would really like to network with or to hang
Yeah.
out with, right? So
There
it's
used to
usually
be
either some kind of
one.
closed communities or some more expensive events and so on.
Yeah, there used to be one called Silicon Roundabout, which was a good kind of beer down the pub with some other founders. I don't know if that still exists. It depends what you're looking
I
for. If it's just
think
to
that
meet other
might.
founders and kind of feel part of a startup community and share war stories, something like Silicon Roundabout's great. The London startup scene somewhere a bit more between kind of meeting some interesting investors and active founders and hearing people pitch and getting inspiration. But if you're looking to make strategic connections, it's less about looking at startup events and more about thinking about industry conferences, industry events that would house the type of individuals that are potential customers of yours or have experience in that space, so you can meet people that you know are the sorts of people you should know who could give you advice and contacts into your potential clients or potential
Mm,
advisors. So you kind of start to network outside of business networking groups and outside of startup networking groups and start going more to sort of industry events, buy tickets for certain conferences and kind of use those as a way to make those connections. You're probably more likely to do that than and the other tip on networking, what really works for me, and when you first start out, networking is key, and as you get more established, sort of networking becomes less of a driver of business, and certainly if you start to build a personal brand. But what really worked for us was the mindset of, we're not going networking to find a client. I'm not going networking to find an investor. I'm going networking to find someone who might be useful to me at some point, might be able to
hmm.
connect
Yeah.
me to someone the next
Yeah.
step along. And if you can go with that mindset, you become less of a salesperson going, oh, will you invest in me? And more, I'm raising investment. You don't know any investors. And more just kind of, tell me about your business. Tell me about what you're doing. Tell me about your world. I'm building a business. I've got some really, but I don't really want to talk about that. What I'd love to know is how you find this right now and how you find that right now, which is all aligned to your value proposition, because it's you're getting some data about to inform your product, but it becomes much more about them and a much more conversation. The other good tip, if you end up in one of these events and you do end up speaking to an investor, you know what every founder does? So let me tell you about my idea. It's absolutely brilliant. It's the best thing ever. We're raising funding soon. Can I send you my pitch deck? And they're like, yeah, go on then. Here's my card. But the founders that go up and say, oh, nice to meet you. Oh, you're an investor. Fantastic. Tell me, what's the shining star in your portfolio? Which startup are you
Mm,
most excited about and why? And once they tell you the answer, go, oh, and you must have some horror stories. Like what's the
mm,
investment you wish you never made? Or what's the investment you turned down that's gone on to be a big thing? make it about them. And then
Mm.
eventually they'll go, oh, and what is it you do? Oh, well, I've got a startup and it does this. And don't say any more than that. And then go back to them and they'll go, no, tell me more about your startup. So just be
That is
different to
such a
everyone
good
else,
advice.
right? Be
Yeah.
different to make it about them. Make them feel like you want to know about them. You don't just want their money.
Yeah.
And they're more likely to invite you in for a meeting than anyone that's gone, oh, I've got a brilliant idea. Here's my, can I send you my pitch?
That is such a good advice. And I think in the process of that, you also learn about them. So actually learn about what, what they're afraid of and what they actually like.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you can
Really,
tailor your pitch as well.
Yeah. I'll tell you a funny story. There was this guy, seemed good, but then he went and said this and it completely put me off investing in them. And you're going, I'm never going to say
Exactly.
that. You're just finding out about how they think much better
Exactly.
than asking for something.
Exactly. Another thing that came to mind is, it was one thing that I've done in the beginning, especially in the beginning when I moved to London, was what you mentioned earlier as well, just messaging people on LinkedIn or cold emailing people and just not asking for anything specific. I was just like, hey, you look like you're doing something interesting, or I'm doing something similar to you. Do you want to go for lunch sometime? No, no expectations. I don't want anything from you. I'm not selling anything. I always say I'm not selling anything, because on every cold email, cold DM, we usually expect that the person tries to sell us something. And some people don't reply, but some of them do, and some of them became some of my closest friends in London now, right? Or they came to a
That's it.
podcast or like whatever. And it's kind of like with investors. That's another thing I often mention about networking, is like, you need to reach out to 100 people and then 2 of them are going to change your life. But
Yeah.
you cannot expect that every single one of them is going to be a life-changing encounter
No.
for you. So
No, that's it.
that's
And you often find that people will circle back years later.
yes. Yeah.
We recently signed up a client that I met networking in 2019. Yeah, it was an event at the House of Lords that we were invited to, just to name drop it. But it was it was a pretty cool kind of startup tech event about blockchain. And yeah, they signed up a couple of weeks ago to be a client. They'd engaged in some events. We chatted occasionally on Zoom calls at when they were at these sort of various events and stuff. And then eventually they became a decent client. And there was no expectation for that. We just met and hit it off in the at this networking event, and they liked what we stood for and have followed us ever since. And these things can take time sometimes as well, and not be instant.
Yeah, exactly. A few very quick questions for the end, maybe just 2 or 3. What's the number one book or course or person or experience that had the biggest impact on your life?
So absolutely Daniel Priestley and his key person of influence stuff. So we, as I sort of said that story, Daniel, we kind of loved his stuff. We were trying to implement it, and then he came across us through and ended up being a shareholder and supporting us in our venture. And as a result of that, we went on his programs and actioned what he talks about in his book more thoroughly. And the result of that was just incredible. I think I'm right in saying the first 12 months after having him on board, we grew 300%.
Oh, wow.
And the year after that, we grew 200%. It was absolutely game changing for our business. So his key principles around the key person of influence, we've talked a lot about today with the kind of personal brand stuff and how to and leveraging that. Absolute game changer. His book around 24 assets and thinking about the valuable assets in the business that someone might eventually come and acquire. Product's just one of them. There's culture, there's systems, there's all of these 24 different assets that hold value in your business. IP, methodology, all of this stuff was a complete game changer on kind of thinking about what we build other than product to make sure we have a valuable business we can sell. And then his thinking around being oversubscribed, again, is an absolute game changer in terms of sales and marketing. And that very much relates to some of what we've talked about in terms of having a waiting list of investors and making it really obvious that you're in demand and people want you. So yeah, those 3 books and going on, actually investing in him investing in us and being able to go on his courses. But it's one of those things we've been kind of holding off going on his programs and doing all this stuff because we're like, will it work when it work? Oh, I don't really know. And it's one of those things that we wish we'd have done it earlier. we wish we'd have done it 3 years earlier, because we'd be so much further ahead in our business if we had. So yeah, for me, they're hands down the game changers.
That's amazing. I've heard of him. We've even exchanged a few messages at some point, and he's. I mean, if you're in the UK, he's quite. Yeah, he's quite known in the startup ecosystem. But I never really took the time to dive into any of his materials and the things that he's teaching. But it sounds like I need to change that. So,
The whole
thanks for that
reason
advice.
this book exists is because of Daniel, and
Amazing.
that book changed the course of our business. So yeah, well worth. There's a lot of business gurus out there, and sometimes, because Daniel's so good at marketing and so good at got such a big profile, he can sometimes get bundled into the categories of some of those kind of slightly cheesy kind of business coaches that sell you a course that doesn't really work. And people are worried, I think, with Daniel and his stuff, he's just another one of those, but absolutely isn't. Like he unlike most business coaches who don't seem to implement any of their strategies that they teach, he lives by every single business he's built, and he's now on his fourth multi-million pound business. He's built around the strategies he shares, and that's his formula, and it works. So yeah, he lives what he teaches. He lives and breathes it, and yeah, he's fantastic.
Nice. Okay. Thanks for that recommendation. One final question for the end. You see a lot of startups, you see a lot of pitches, you see a lot of business ideas. Is there any area where you see opportunity right now, business opportunities right now for startups, for entrepreneurs who want to start something?
Wow. I mean, there's opportunities all over the place. Obviously, I think the obvious ones are obviously in sort of AI, Web3, but also there's a lot of noise around that. There's a lot of people kind of just tacking blockchain and AI onto the end of things that don't really require it and don't really need it, just because it's a keyword. So I think it needs to be genuinely required, as opposed to a fad. I think there's always opportunities in the UK around fintech. I think we're sort of talking about fintech 3.0 now. We're doing sort of very back end stuff. All the sort of front end stuff's been done, like consumer facing stuff's been done. A lot of the systems stuff has been done. It's now about integrations and connections between fintech. So it's kind of like the third. I think it's something like the third evolution of fintech, and fintech 3.0, I think they're calling it, but it's getting more complex. This is the thing, right? As we're not building simple products anymore. 10, 15 years ago, it was like, I need to demonstrate I can build a marketplace like Amazon. Now that's done at a click of a button on something like Shopify. And so now the level of technology and the amount of funding needed just to build a very basic prototype is quite large, and it's quite an interesting development, that there's a lot of tech that's highly valuable that none of us see, because it's just connecting stuff together. So we had a client doing something around in InsurTech, but it was something to do with connecting all of the different component parts together. Like when you make an insurance claim, you ring the people to make the claim, and they have to send that off to the insurance company. The insurance company have to send something off to the people who actually write the insurance and actually back the loan, to get the money, to send it back, to send it to you. And it's all very complicated, and it's still done on an Excel spreadsheet. And there's billions of pounds being lost and overpaid and underpaid and put into wrong accounts as a result of this. And they're looking to, and it's highly complex, but massively valuable. And it's those sorts of things where I think there's huge opportunities for the right people, but also the funding required just to get an even basic version of that to start to function, to allow a large insurance company to feel comfortable adopting that as a solution. We're not talking about making a basic single feature MVP here. So the game's changing slightly, and investors almost need to catch up a little bit to say, look, we're kind of past, for a lot of industries like fintech, like insurtech, we kind of feel like we're moving past the kind of classic Eric Ries lean startup. And yes, you want to be lean, and yes, those principles still apply, but there's still very much a focus on what's the MVP, what's the minimum viable feature, what's the single thing, and not every highly valuable business that's going to generate huge wealth can achieve that in a way that could work. So yeah, it's an interesting time, I think, of a bit of a transition between that we're building a dating app versus we're solving this multi-billion-dollar problem within the insurance space that's very technical and behind the scenes.
Interesting. Nice. Okay. Well, thank you for that. We're going to wrap up at this point. James, thank you so much. I've learned a lot. I'm sure anyone who is looking to raise funding, they've hopefully learned even more. They should follow you. They should get your book. What's the best way to follow you, to reach out to you?
Yeah, well, connect with me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active. So if you just search James Church on LinkedIn, yeah, I'm sure you'll find me. And if you want a copy of the book, anyone listening in the UK, if you go to pitchready.co.uk, you'll be able to take a short quiz to test your investment readiness, and you'll be able to get a link to get a free copy of the book sent to you in the post. No postage, all on us. If you're outside of the UK, you'll get a PDF or an audiobook version. You can choose what you'd like. So if you want to digest more about what we talked about for free, just go to pitchready.co.uk and get yourself a book for free.
There you go. Absolutely no reason not to get the book. I'm going to link to the page also in the podcast description, so it's all just one click away. And thanks again, James, for coming on.
No, you're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Take care. Thanks for listening until the end. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like the content, please do me a favor and click the like button on YouTube, or give us 5 stars on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. Leave a comment, subscribe if you want to hear more from us. That really helps also to get the podcast out there, and that helps me get more interesting guests and create even more interesting content. So I really appreciate if you do that. If you have any other comments, questions, feel free to message me. You can find me on Twitter. That's usually the best channel. The link should be somewhere in the description. And check out my Twitter. I try to tweet interesting stuff about similar content that we talk about on the podcast. Key insights from the podcast as well, and just generally stuff that I learn and stuff that I do. So see you. Thanks.